First discussion. Let's go. What better place to start than the origins of everything? And what I specifically refer to here is what came first, supply or demand? Icebreaker, it's supply. At least that's my argument. A lot of people state that there's a common saying, necessity is the mother of all creation, that if you demand it, they will make it. I tend to view it backwards. I tend to view that the origins of life, the origins of invention, the origins of a variety of factors are functions of the existence of a supply of something that results in a breakthrough that could not have been possible before because of the existence of that supply. Substantiate that. Let's make this argument very simple. Life. The existence of life was a spontaneous event that occurred because of the formation and orientation of molecules in a particular orientation. There was no specific demand for life, or at least I can't conceptualize why there would be a demand for life. Uh, in order for you to make this point, you'd have to argue that there was a demanding force or a force pressing towards life. Um, you can argue it more from the mathematical or the physics perspective, from entropy, but let's take this a little further. After the formation of basic life and photosynthetic effects, and a variety of other factors, the abundance of oxygen led to a supply that then created the demand for the perpetuation of life, or for the diversification of life. Let's take it a step further. In the 1960s, nobody was sitting around thinking to themselves, you know what I really need? I need a cellular device that operates on electromagnetic wavelengths and does not operate on a corded system. That simply was not the case. The case was they were looking for advancements within the field of telephones, within that technology, but that step was a function of spontaneous invention of the supply. There are other factors at play here. I might caveat the supply element to the formation of a supply within the perspective of the cost of that supply. Example, electric vehicles. Very popular discussion today. Electric vehicles were actually more common initially in the early 1900s than gas vehicles, than internal combustion engine was. The cost parameters are what dictated its supply and hence ultimately its demand. Because I mean, ultimately the impetus there in the 1800s, transitioning from horses and other forms of transportation in that regard to more automated locomotion, there was not necessarily a demand in that regard. The machinery was desired, but it wasn't desired in that regard. It's the supply, the creation, the formation of that supply led to the demand. Money is a great example. People have this perverse view that money is a construct of a demand to satiate the fungibility of assets, that the stable master didn't want to trade horses for individual chickens, and the individual who owned the chicken coop didn't want to distribute his eggs for chairs. This bartering notion that led to a ubiquitous form of currency, a common stead asset that you could all transfer amongst one another and utilize it to balance the values of horses and chickens and goats and houses and what have you. It's just not correct. Money, as a very popular YouTube and financial character, let's say Mike Green, Logical Capital, and now Simplify ETFs, and prior to that with Peter Thiel's fund, it introduced me to the idea that money is that which extinguishes debt. And it's taken many forms. But if the king demands you pay him in chickens, then chickens are money. That if you are able to settle anything with anything, that is money. So the demand for money did not come because of a bartering system leading to some sort of interoperable asset that could be utilized by all. Rather, debt was formed first, and a common currency to satiate that debt is what created metallic-based currencies, or later on digital, like paper-based currencies, and later after that digital-based currencies, and then derivatives off of those. And now you get to a point where you can't even really define money. But very conceptually, very basic here. What that implies, that supply precedes demand, or that supply is created spontaneously and relevant to its price point, relevant to the environment, relative to other forces acting upon that supply to promote or demote it. Demand is formed because of the existence of that supply. It seems to put the cart before the horse, except there would be no cart without the horse, meaning the demand for the cart only existed because of the supply of the horse. And I think not necessarily economics. I might just be incorrect here in the belief that I was taught, or fundamentally there was a view in my mind, that demand always preceded supply, that demand facilitated the creative spirits that formed the supply to satiate the demand, that demand was preeminent, that it came beforehand. What that implies is that society as a whole operates on a notion of the formation of goods and services. There is this functionality of consumerism versus production, that there is a balancing act in the world between finite assets and goods, supply, and the demand for those goods. It kind of puts that argument on its head, that in reality, the assets exist and the demand for those assets are formed based on the existence of those assets, based on the abundance, the pricing, the effects that supply has on demand, and the effects that the utilization of those supplies have on the supply itself. This is going to get into the next video, and this concept of reflexivity, where this is the real nuance in a lot of different fields. It is easy to model something. It is easy to model things with changing assumptions. It is very hard to model something where the system itself that you're trying to model interacts with the environment that the system is in. You see it documented in a variety of different places. This concept of reflexivity, this concept of in finance, market makers, delta hedging, and it affecting the underlying assets that they're trying to delta hedge. You see it in elements of life initially, where the spontaneous formation of protein assembly that led to the formation of single cellular organisms created byproducts that accumulated, which changed the dynamic of the ecosystem over large scales of time, which then affected the individual organisms that were formed, which caused them to decrease. So they themselves had an effect on the ecosystem, and then had an effect on the organisms as a whole. So the primary point of this video is just making a potential argument that I don't even truly know if it's that much of an argument. It might be something that's more ubiquitous than I understand, but that supply conceptually seems to appear, or it appears to me, forces act upon that supply, scarcity, political desires for the utilization of that supply, and the demand is actually a function of a starting unit of that supply, and that it flows in that direction. TVs were never desired. The supply for TVs, the creation of that technology created the demand structure for that technology. It formed because of advancements in technology that were as a result of changes in electricity costs, changes in semiconductors, changes in lighting technology, changes in a variety of other elements. But supply preceded the invention. Supply creates demand. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Argue, leave me some comments. Let me know. Tell me I'm wrong. I'd love it. Bye, guys.